you know? So I don't really have to mosh. You really can't take it too seriously because I like. If I say the word house, like we're both going to see a different picture this. It's 1966, and Bob Dylan was super famous but also in big trouble. He was tired, taking drug-scaled speed, and half his fans hated him. He had to carry the hopes of a whole generation on his shoulders. He wasn't the folk music hero anymore. He was the electric betrayer, the man who let down a whole movement biasing. Electric guitars and never going back. The boos were louder than the cheers. Everyone expected too much from him. And Dylan, he was running out of energy. Then one night changed everything. Not with bright lights or clapping, but with quiet stillness. And the sound of nothing at all. Bimit. 1966. Dylan was a wreck. Behind cool sunglasses and mysterious lyrics was a man about to break. He was being chased by fans, attacked by newspapers, followed by reporters, and forced to keep touring non-stop. He couldn't stop. They wouldn't let him. To his record company wanted more. The public wanted answers, and Dylan wanted none of it. His concerts had like battles. Crowds yelled traitor and walked out when he picked up an electric guitar. At the famous Manchester Free Trade Hall show, someone screamed Judas before. He played an angry version of Like a Rolling Stone. That wasn't a concert. It was like casting out demons. He was barely sleeping, taking pills, smoking all the time, playing to angry crowds. The legend of Dylan was exploding, and the real man was disappearing under it. Then came the crash. What hurt even more than the booze was the silence from people who had once called him a friend. Pete Seeger, Joan Baez, the Greenwich Village poets and folk music leaders. They didn't just disagree. They felt betrayed. They had made Dylan the voice of protest, the heart of their revolution. And now they watched him trade acoustic truth for electric rebellion. They didn't understand wars, they refused to. He became an outcast among his own people. The very movement he helped create now treated him like a traitor. The stage, once a safe place, had become a war zone. And Dylan was completely alone. There was one night, never officially written down, only whispered about, where Dylan almost fell down during a show. Some say it was Sydney, others say Paris, wherever. It was, the signs were clear. Glassy eyes, shaking hands. He forgot words, stared into the dark space of the audience, and looked like might fall over any second. Backstage, he was pale and shaking. Not from being nervous, but from being totally exhausted. His body was screaming for rest. His mind was breaking apart. And yet, the show went in. In the last year and a half, maybe 12, I don't know. But the songs before up till, one of those chords. I wrote the fourth record in Greece. On July 29, 1966. Dylan was riding his Triumph motorcycle through the winding roads near Woodstock. New York, what exactly happened that day is still unclear. There were no police reports, no hospital records, just whispers, conspiracy theories, silence. But what to know is this. Dylan disappeared from public life almost right away. No more tours, no press, no albums, just darkness. Some say the crash was real, others say it was fake, a chance to escape. Either way, that day marked the beginning of the most important part of his life. Because in the quiet that followed, Dylan didn't die. He was reborn. In the shadow of chaos, it was Sarah who held him together. Dylan's wife became more than just a partner. She became his lifeline. In their hidden Woodstock home, she built him a safe world where fame couldn't reassign expectations, couldn't chase him down. There were no cameras, no phones, just the rhythm of family life, the simplicity of shared meals, and the comfort of knowing someone was still there when the world had turned. Away, she didn't ask for answers. She didn't ask for songs. She let him disappear, and in that silence, he started to breathe again. Some believe the motorcycle crash was never about twisted metal or broken bones. It was about escape. A perfectly timed act of erasing himself done not. With smoke and mirrors, but with silence. No one saw the wreck. No photograph showed up. No ambulance ever came. No official recordicasts. It was as if Bob Dylan Themis watched, studied, legendary figurine modern music simply vanished into thin air. And maybe that's exactly way it's planned. Because by 1966, the Dylan world knew wasn't really Dylan no more. He had become a projection, a lightning rod for other people's dreams, politics, and pain. They didn't want the man. They wanted the symbol, the prophet, the rebel, the savior. And Dylan was choking under the weight of it all. So he vanished, not just from the spotlight, but from the story. In a single moment, he took back control over his life in the most dramatic way possible by making everyone wonder if was gone for good. No interviews, no explanations, just stillness. If he did fake the accident, it wasn't a lie. It was a cry for air. A chanchetto hit the brakes before the cliff. A final desperate move to escape the cage built from gold records, magazine covers, and screams of worship disguised as applause. It wasn't just about stepping back. It was about survival, about destroying the myth before the myth destroyed the man. Because for Bob Dylan, disappearing was weakness. It was genius. Instead of returning to the stage, Dylan disappeared into a place no screaming fan or hungry journalist could follow. He moved into a modest home in Woodstock with Sarah and the children. Not a palace, not a compound, just a house where the noise could finally stop. The world expected a comeback, but Dylan didn't give them one. What heg of himself was solitude. Gone were the stadium lights and the roar of crowds in their place. Thoughting of a clock, the scratch of a pian, the low strum of a guitar. Late at night, he surrounded himself with the only things that made sense anymore. Music, family, silence. He was no longer chasing a revolution. He was trying to remember who he was before he turned him into a symbol. It wasn't the basement of a pink-painted house with creaky wooden stairs and concrete walls that something truly amazing happened. Dylan gathered the band not for fame, not for legacy, but for healing. What began as loose jams turned into a sacred ritual. These songs weren't written for radio. They were carved out of the American Sabancias, stories of outlaws, drifters, railroads, judgment, laughter, and loss. Characters both imaginary and real. Drawn from the dust of a country that felt just as broken as he did. These sessions, later known as the Basement Tapes, weren't clean. They weren't polished, they weren't supposed to be. That was the point. This was Dylan throwing off the chains of expectation, playing because it healed him, writing back as it gave his soul a shape again. There were no rules, no deadlines, no executives pacing outside the door, just songs echoing off stone walls captured on old tape machines created by men who had nothing to prove and a very thing to feel. And with every lyric, every chord, Dylan reached for something far more precious than fame. He was taking back his freedom, one note at a time. While the world gossiped, theorized, and mourned what he thought was the end of an icon, Bob Dylan was doing something almost unheard of in the music world. He was building from ashes, quietly, privately, away from the noise. While others screamed for answers, he put himself back together in silence, one breath at a time. The motorcycle crash, real or not, had given him the only thing he truly lacked: escape, a way out from the circus, the myth the crazy whirl of fame that had eaten Upi's identity. And within that space, surrounded by trees instead of turbises, Dylan didn't just rest, he came back to life. His healing was not just physical, it was cellular. His spirit, bruised by years of pressure and betrayal, began to recover its rhythm. The man who once wrote for nations, who held crowds in his hands, now whispered verses to himself. He no longer needed dead toe carry the world. He just needed to exist within. His own. Gone was the spokesman. Gone was the rebel messiah. What remained was a father holding his child, a husband sitting quietly at a kitchen table, a soul relearning how to live without performing. For the first time in years, Dylan wasn't performing for anyone, not even himself. When he returned in 1967 with John Wesley Harding, the transformation was undeniable. The album didn't shout, it whispered its sparse arrangements and Old Testament undertones. Spoke of a man who'd walked through fire and emerged not angry, but clear-eyed and still. Critics didn't know what to make of it. Some were confused, others were mesmerized, but all of them understood. Bob Dylan had changed. He no longer followed the culture. He no longer led. He had outgrown it. And in that act of refusal, he rewrote the rules of survival for every artist who would follow. That mysterious night in 1966, whether a real crash or a carefully planned escape, did more than divide Bob Dylan's career. It cut him free from the expectations, the pressure, and the myth that had been built around him like a cage. It was the night. He chose not to go up in flames like so many other icons, but to disappear in death's shadows and find a different path, a quieter path, a survivor's path. In a decade that chewed up talent and spit out corpses, Dylan did something unthinkable. He stepped off the ride before it flew off the rails. While authors overdosed, unraveled, or became caricatures of themselves, Dylan slipped through a crack in the system and rewrote his fate in exile. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. He didn't need to scream to be heard. He didn't need applause to exist. That night gave him the only thing that could truly save him. Distance from the madness, from the crowds, from himself. It's one of music's cruel ironies, that silence nearly caused by Death Beckham. The sound of Dylan's rebirth. In stepping away, he stepped into his truest form. Not a prophet, not a puppet, but a man in full control of his voice, his legacy, and his soul. Because sometimes it's not the stagger that defines you. It's what you do when lights go out. And Dylan. More than onion knew that legacy isn't built in front of cameras. It's forged in the dirt. Even now, the ghost of that night clings to Dylan's every word. You can hear it in the slow, world-weary draw of his voice, like someone who's been to the edge and never quite came back. His phrasing carries a kind of distance, a refusal to surrender, Felito the moment. In interviews, he answers in riddles, shrugs off the past, or looks straight ahead like he's hiding something behind the sunglasses. And when he performs live, he often seems caught in two timelines at once. The man on stage and the shadow just behind him. He's never publicly explained what happened in July of 1966, never confirmed the details, never offered clarity because maybe talks plain it would be to break the spell. To reduce a near mythical disappear cento something ordinary. And Dylan has never been ordinary. Those who know him see, there's a line in his soul that was drawn that summer. On one side, the boy genius, the fiery poet, the revolutionary. On the other, the survivor, the father, the wanderer. That fracture never fully healed. And maybe it wasn't supposed to. Because knees, you've slipped out of the machine. Once you've truly let it all fall apart, you see the world differently. You speak differently. You protect yourself differently. And Bob Dylan, the artist who seemed to carry the entire counterculture on his back, learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes silence isn't retreat, its resistance.